What's going on, everyone? Today we're going to be talking about truck suspension, what to look for, a little bit of a later broadcast. If you guys are joining us this evening, let me know where you're watching from. Today I'm going to be discussing suspension, what to look out for, give you a little bit of an overview on what we're going to be talking about. I'm going to talk about the types of suspensions that are out there, semi-truck suspension. I'm also going to talk about common issues in the warm suspension. I'm going to talk about tools and equipment for troubleshooting suspension, step-by-step troubleshooting processes. I'm going to also talk about some preventive maintenance and just what you need to look for if you just don't have an answer to some of your questions. And at the end, we're going to go ahead and cover some questions. So if you got any questions about your truck, hit us up. Hit us up in the chat. Let me know where you're watching from. California's in the house. Hello, California. How you guys doing out there? I know everyone's pretty exhausted about this current political race. And I know everybody don't really like to talk about it, but I did see that there's not a lot of male voters out there. And in my analytics, I see that most of our viewers are males. Most of our viewers are, I want to say, between 35. Let me look at the age range. Let me know where you guys are watching from or if you got any questions. Either way, what I'm saying is get out there and vote if you do want to make a change. As I mentioned, we're going to be discussing suspension today. We're going to get started here shortly. We're just kind of waiting for everybody to get on. Let me know where you're watching from. If you got any questions about your truck, hit us up. We're going to be talking about preventive maintenance, looking at shock absorbers. If your truck is not handling well, if you have worn tires, if you have suspension issue, air leaks, these are all things that I want to cover. Detroit's in the house. What's going on? We're about to get this show started. Hope everyone's doing well this evening. Wanted to wait a little bit longer, get everybody on. Make sure you guys are replacing your windshield wipers. We're getting into a rainy season right now. You don't want to get caught out there with some bad windshield wipers. So the first thing I want to discuss today is just the importance of suspension, and that's what we're going to get started with. What's going on this evening, guys? Hope everyone's doing well. Going to get this started here. Got a few people on with us with chat. Hope everyone's doing well. Let me adjust this chat here. So, got Florida in the house. All right. So the importance of suspension. Why is suspension important, and why should we be worried about maintaining it? Suspension is very crucial. Okay, it's the whole truck is riding on this. So maintain right quality, safety, reducing wear on the other components. These are, just basically self-explanatory. You don't want to be out there with some worn suspension. I'm going to give you some things to look out for. If it's tough to keep it in the lane, what I notice, if you do have some kind of suspension issues, it's more noticeable when you're loaded as well. You got to think about whenever you are driving a truck that's not loaded, of course, you're going to be driving. It's going to drive a lot different than when it is loaded. So if you do have a suspension issue where you have wore bush ends and it's not as stable as it should be, safety is going to be a big concern. You're not going to be able to handle that load if it's shifting on you and be able to control it safely. So it's very important. We're going to talk about that. So if you have any kind of rough rides or you notice on some uneven tire wear, reduced handling and stability, it's hard for it to keep it in the lane. If you have excessive steering wheel play, excessive vibrations, or even noises. These are all things to look out for on your suspension. If you guys are new to the truck, this might be hard to recognize right away, but if you've been in the truck for a while, definitely keep an eye on these different items. As like I mentioned, tire wear. We're gonna go to the share screen here, and I want to discuss, or I'm gonna share with you some video of what some tire wear is gonna look like due to suspension. So let me pull that up. If your suspension is not holding tight and you have too much play, the truck's gonna run all over the place. You can if you go over a bump, you'll feel it shifting. Those are things that we see as well. So be careful with that as well. Those are signs as well when I speak about handling. When we talk about tire wear, you see tire wear, it's just an uneven type of wear. You'll see it on the sides. Those are things that you want to look out for. Don't ignore them. And over time, if those types of wear go without being replaced, or the suspension still being out of alignment, then those tires are just out. They're not going to be usable no more. So this video here was from a video that I shared about suspension, and in this video, as you can see here, we got some tire wear. This is what it looks like up under the truck, and here is just some good signs of some tire wear. Adjust the chat over here so when I go to the share screen, we're gonna be back and forth from the share screen over here. All right, so you can see here on the tire how it's not wearing evenly. These are indicators of suspension. This is going to be an indicator of suspension. That's one item to be looking out for. One item that's just, when I mention tires, you're going to be able to see that on trailers as well. So uneven tire wear, that's just an example of uneven tire wear. Rough rides, you're going to be able to just kind of tell rough ride on your own. If the truck if it starts to ride gradually more and more rough, you notice it's not handling well. These are definitely signs. As I mentioned, reduce handling. If you can't keep it in the lane, I've seen in some cases where if you brake, the truck is going to shift to the side. Now later on, I'm going to talk about alignments as well, part of the in the maintenance part of this section. But when your truck is loaded and you're out of an alignment as well, and you have all this play with worn bushings on all the control arms, and I'm gonna give you a better outline of how these suspensions are set up, and you're loaded, man, it's just gonna make it worse. Whenever your rear axle is not aligned to the front axles and you're not loaded, in some cases it won't be as bad, but when you're loaded, it actually pushes more pressure on the back of those tires. It's gonna create even more control issues. So if you have a slight misalignment from your rear suspension to the front suspension, or your rear axles to the front axles, and it may be off just a hair, you might not feel it as much while you're not loaded, but when you get loaded, you'll actually start to feel it more. And that's dangerous situations, because if you're driving at top highway speeds and you come across, boom, a dip in the road. If you drive in the United States, you know that our roads are awful. For some reason, our roads are just probably the worst roads out there, and I don't want to blame who. There's no one. There's a lot of people to blame over that. Mostly, it's going to be organizations is not being organized enough to do that. So, back to the suspension and stability. Getting your alignment done. If you have your axles that are not aligned, you're going to feel that, and the reason why you're going to feel it more, as I mentioned, you have more pressure on the rear axles. So, if you have rear axles that are slightly not aligned with the front axle, but when you put that weight on it, it's going to make it even more. When you're driving down the road, you have the back of the truck trying to push you to the side and the front of the truck trying to stay straight. So this is the kind of conditions, and it can go either way. So keeping up with alignments is very important. And noticing the rideability or the ride quality of the truck, paying attention to these type of things is very important, and don't ignore them. If you notice some kind of issues going on there, then definitely bring it up. And we're going to be talking about some more issues here. There's different types of suspensions. I'm not going to be able to cover every single type of suspension that's out there, but what I do want to say is they're coming with just different combinations of suspension types. Hendrickson is going to be probably the main supplier of suspension, and I'm going to bring up one of their documents here. We'll go to a share screen. So here's this. This is the style of the front suspension, and it's pretty common, but they can switch it up. This one here is not as common, but what it's gonna say is you got of course the beam, the axle beam. The only thing that's really not common on this particular suspension is the airbags. You will see some airbags on the front of the suspension, but that's gonna be only on some applications like a Volvo or something like that. You're not gonna see them very often. Very often they're gonna be just a regular beam with the 2 leaf springs connecting to these. And here in the bushings, where these bushings connect, this is where your rubber bushings start to wear. Also on the hanger, they're not showing the frame of the hanger, but here's the front view of the beam, of the front axle beam. And airbag, the airbag suspension in the front is very smooth riding. If they have them on Volvos, it's a very smooth ride, but it does make it just a little bit more components to repair. As you can see with this particular setup here, let me zoom in a little bit more. If you look at this setup here, this one takes 2 leveling valves. You see, this is a leveling valve. This is a leveling valve here to supply and air to this bag, and then this one has a separate leveling valve as well. So we see sometimes this part starts to leak, the leveling valve starts to leak. Those items can be a little bit tough. Now, most suspensions are going to be a mixture of air suspension and leaf springs. It's a combination of the two. On the rear, I'm going to pull up that document for the rear, but on the front, let me pull up a video on the front one, because that one is really not, you're not going to see the air suspension as often as you're going to see one without air suspension, which is like this here. So with this one here, this is just the normal setup you're going to see. You got the leaf spring here, the U-bolt onto the axle. You're not going to have an airbag. This is the only difference. Now, this is what you're going to see most common. For the rear suspension, they can do combinations like this, like they're showing in the front. Now, this is a different style suspension. This is actually for super heavy duty, 3 axles. But this is the type of suspension that's going to run on your rear axles. It's going to be a combination of a spring and an airbag. So when we're dealing with suspension on semi trucks, it's not just leaf springs. They run with airbags as well. And as I mentioned, we're not going to be able to cover every single type of suspension out there. There's so many different makes and models, but the concepts are all the same. They basically either have a half a leaf spring, or if the heavier duty ones, like the dump trucks, they're going to be strictly springs. The very heavy concrete trucks, they're going to be just a bunch of springs stacked on top of each other, since they're dealing with so much weight. But on most semi trucks, they're going to be like this. They're going to have a leaf spring combined with an airbag. So that's the basic construction of the air suspension, or the suspension on a semi truck, is a combination of air and leaf springs, and you also have rubber. So common model on the trucks, they use this for smoother ride and fuel efficiency. So I really didn't know that actually helped with fuel efficiency. I knew that helped with load, because I know airbags can help you bring on a lot more weight. But then when you look into like the dump trucks or the concrete trucks, they're not running larger airbags. They're actually running more leaf springs. So they're stacking those leaf springs up. So as you can see, the anchor points on this suspension is going to be in this area here is where your axle is going to sit. You can see the hollow area. These are the U-bolts, these bright chrome. Very good image here. Right here is going to be your U-bolts here. These are the U-bolts that bolt this spring onto on this case the top of the axle. So it's not going to be on the bottom of the axle. As you see, this particular setup, this spring is bolted to the top of the axle. It angles down, and then it actually bolts here, fastens to this particular hanger, and that hanger is going to hold that suspension in place. And this is that torque arm you guys see. This torque arm is going to be going from the frame of the truck to the axle to help with torquing. And each suspension is going to be like this. You have your leveling valve here. The leveling valve is going to supply air to your airbags. And in this case, for a rear suspension, they're going to have these in tandem, which means they'll have double of these. And what I do like about the rear suspension on the airbags is only one leveling valve is going to control all four. You're not going to have like the front here, as I showed you on that front. On this front, it had a bag or a leveling valve for each side. But as I mentioned, you're not going to see this too common. If you guys want to inspect your truck and you just look it down in your truck and you'll see an airbag there, no biggie. That's actually a really smooth ride. It's just more components to maintain. So that's kind of where I'm just trying to bring aware of, you know, all the components on suspension so we can get a better idea on how to maintain it. All right. So so with the rubber is very important because it's these metal components where they fasten on, there's going to be rubber between those, and that's what kind of holds that in place. And those are the items that start to wear. The bushings are made out of rubber, and they will last a long time. You know, you won't start having problems till after the famous 500,000 mile mark. And it also depends on where you're driving. If you guys are driving in these roads, on these off roads in these container yards that have big potholes, and it don't even have to be a container yard. A lot of these roads in all of our cities are really tough. So we're going to give you some examples. I want to give you some examples of what these bushings look like when they start to wear. So let me pull this up. And what it is, it's just like any other bushing. It's going to be rubber. And what we're going to be looking for, I'm going to show you here. So this is a leaf spring. This is the leaf spring eye. Let me see if I can rotate this. This is how the leaf spring actually sits. It's like this. And if I bring up the rear suspension here, this is this bushing here. This is this area here. So this is this area of the leaf spring, but in real time wore out. Let me go back to that image. So this is the bushings. This is where how they start to wear and how it starts to look. This is one already taken off, and this is really bad. If you get to this point, you're not going to be able to keep using this spring. Appreciate everyone that's hitting us up on the chat. I'll get on to you guys' chat here shortly. Matter of fact, I might take a break so that we can go ahead and start talking with you guys. Appreciate everyone that's joined us this evening. What we got? Florida's in the house. So we got a viewer that commented about his driver being, or his father being a driver, and I guess he was hurt. It's tough for him to turn one certain way on the truck. We're going to be talking more about suspension and stuff like that. If it's hard to turn on one side more than the other, you might want to look into troubleshooting the gearing, the steering system, the gearbox, the power steering pump, making sure those are working properly. It shouldn't be softer to steer on one side more than the other. So if he recognizes that there could be some issues going on there, and I definitely would recommend getting it checked out. It's not an odd question. You're from Colombia. Thank you for that's a different chat. No, it's not an odd question. It's just usually if you're gonna have a steering issue like that, and it's gonna be tough to turn on one side more than the other, it could be a pump or it could be a gearbox. I would make sure to get that checked out. I wouldn't, if it shouldn't do that. It should be smooth all the way through. Some of the oils never get changed out of these gearboxes or power steering pumps. There could be some binding going on that side. So something with the steering knuckles, the drag link, all these items need to be checked. The linkages going down from the steering gearbox up to the actual steering wheel. All these items need to be checked, because if there's any binding in there or any of those areas, if you got any of the components or the joints actually worn out, they could bind. So it needs to be checked out, or it could be a pump. What's up, Josh? Thanks for joining us. So appreciate everyone. If you got any comments or any other questions, hit us up in the chat. We're going to be still on for a little bit longer. We're going to still cover the suspension. I want to give you some more information. Let me see here. Let me share some more images. Got some more images of suspension. Here's that same kind of component where you got the bushing kind of pushing out. These bushings won't last forever, so over time they start drying out and pushing itself out like this. And then you're going to start having that tire wear, as I mentioned earlier, which ends up just destroying the tires. So high mileage trucks, if you're in the market as well for buying trucks, that's something to consider as well, because these are all items that are going to need to be serviced sooner rather than later. And you don't want to, get a truck that's just not up to par. A lot of these other, we go back to the Series 60. Everyone likes that engine. Everyone really likes that engine. There's nothing wrong with it. But by the time you get a hold of one of those, it's in a truck that has some really bad suspension parts. So truck suspensions on semi trucks are going to have their combination, as we already covered, of air suspension, leaf spring, and rubber suspension. Okay, so. And they're a very vital component. They're carrying a lot of weight down the road. So definitely do not ignore these signs. Okay, we're going to move over to common issues on the Warren suspension. So common issues we're going to see. Let me move from the share screen. Common issues on the Warren suspensions are going to be air leaks. Air leaks in the air suspension. How to spot air leaks on your airbags on airlines. What you're going to look for is, if you do have hissing noises, if your airbags are all going to be very toasted, they're going to look like they're just dry rotted. These things are going to need to be replaced. Shock absorbers are other items that need to be replaced. Very common. I just gave you some examples of the bushings and the bushings being worn. That's a very common issue. On the leaf springs, sometimes we will see at least a truck come in with a lean, and then a lean to the side. Sometimes it's going to be that leaf spring, a worn leaf spring. Not all the time it's going to be a good idea to rebushing these leaf springs. There's going to be two reasons why. And if we go back to this image here, this particular leaf spring is not going to be reusable, because look how long it went, and it went to a point where it waddled out the hole. It made the hole for the bushing larger. So now this spring is more than likely not going to be usable, because if you try to press a new bushing in here with this extra diameter space, it's going to cause play. It's not going to be as stable. You're still going to have stability problems. So this is another reason why bushings, once they're damaged, definitely get them checked out. We're going to be covering preventive maintenance at the end of this broadcast, so make sure you guys stick with us. And if you got any questions or concerns, give us a shout. If you're looking for a truck shop, we're located here in the DFW area, Dallas, Texas. Here we are down here off of Interstate 20 and Bonneview Road. There's a couple of places here there's a couple of truck stops there. Very easy access. This is all truck area, trucker friendly. So if you're coming through Dallas and you heard about us, you don't have to go into the city. You can stay on the outside, because the city is very tough to get through in a truck. I understand that. Give us a shout, 972-225-3017. We specialize on everything from bumper to bumper, suspension work, after treatment, internal work, anything you're looking for, brakes, maintenance, major work, RVs, light duty, medium duty. We can handle it. Give us a shout, 972-225-3017. We can also help you troubleshoot if you have a truck that's been giving you some problems and you can't figure it out. Bring it to us. We'll help you figure it out. TAT Express, 972-225-3017. Thank you guys for joining us. So let's continue with suspension. So we're discussing the common worn suspension components. You know, that I gave you an example of bushings, leaf springs. They can go out or go lose their actual arch. You'll see the truck kind of lean into the side, or they'll become waddle out like that. Another thing I want to discuss is U-boats. Now, U-boats, if you're not familiar with doing suspension, let me get you back over here to this photo over here. So, U-boats here. U-boats are what fasten and secure the suspension components to the actual truck. Okay, it holds it in place. And you can see how these boats are long. You see how long they are? And they're shaped as a U. That's why they're called U-boats. All right. So over time, whenever you have to do any kind of suspension work, most of the time it's going to be high mileage. Guys, this suspension does last a good long time, probably half the truck life. So if you got over 500,000 miles and you haven't done like total suspension work, eventually it's going to be good to do the bushings and all this, because it will wear over time. And so here's an example of an old U-boat. Now, this U-boat, the reason why this photo was submitted, because the U-boats of course are incorrect, but I want to look at the condition of these U-boats. All right, look at the buildup on this. Okay, so if you look at the thread in this U-boat, what happens is when you go to remove the nuts off of these large U-boats, when you do any kind of service, you're not going to be able to get it secure. It's not going to be safe to reuse these type of boats. Okay, look at the corrosion on there. This is one item to look over and consider, and this is why we don't reuse them. And if you look here at what happens over time as well, not only does corrosion happen, but these U-boats can get stretched. They can get waddled out and stretched out. So trying to reuse them after getting suspension done is not a good idea. We always recommend replacing them. Sometimes these are not even we're not even able to remove them. We usually just cut them off. We'll cut them off with a torch. Just cut them straight off. Save time, get them cut off, and get new hardware, everything new. Because you don't want to reuse anything like this. That's really, really dangerous to reuse anything like that. So when you have worn or loose U-bolts, it can affect the handling as well. So when we discuss maintenance, we're going to discuss maintenance here shortly. Checking the torque on these bolts is pretty important as well, because if they do become loose, and it's possible they can, you want to make sure to check them before they get too loose, because then you have no choice but to replace them, and then you have tire wear problems as well. So the repair can end up just costing you even more in the long run. Appreciate everyone that's joined us this evening. Make sure to hit that like button. I know you guys are all busy out there, but you can play this back later, as we're talking about suspension. Hope you guys find this information useful. Give us a shout, 972-225-3017, if you're looking for service. Appreciate everyone that's joined us. Let me know where you're watching from. Yes, we work on PACCARs. MX-13. That image that I showed on the last broadcast of that compressor was from a PACCAR. So, yes, sir, we do work on PACCAR, and we have the software. Which brings us to our next section with tools and equipment. So this is another item that's really important. It goes back to finding the right people to get the job done, making sure they have the right equipment, because it all looks easy. It all looks easy until you get down and have to do it. It's this type of work is not light. It's very heavy. You have to have the equipment to lift these trucks high enough to be able to get all the weight off the suspension. Now, you can't use shady jacks. You can't stack things up. I recall working and learning in early in the truck repair industry. I see some really shady stuff of cylinder liners getting stacked up, and just really shady ways to stack trucks up. So you need the right equipment is very important. You can't just, I'm going to try to knock this suspension work out because I've done one on a Ford before. It's not going to be the same. You're going to be really let down. You're going to be really let down because the amount of work that is going to go into it is going to be a lot, especially if you don't have the right equipment. You need different size jacks. You're going to need porta powers, large stands, high jacks, be able to bring it up off the ground, like I said, high enough where you can take all the weight off the front end or the rear, so you can actually support the weight of the truck without having anything under it, of course. Multiple jacks to line everything up, porta powers, and what's really going to be important is torque wrenches and the power tools to be able to tighten everything back down. As I mentioned, some of these bolts won't come off, so they'll get cut off. But if someone doesn't have the compressor output with the large torque drive wrench, you're talking about a 1-inch ratchet gun. You could, if you lift the truck high enough, you can get a good gun on there to tighten it up, and then you go with the big torque wrench to make sure your U-bolts are tightened correctly, because under tightening your U-bolts or just using a small air impact, it's not going to tighten enough. And some of these guys won't have the equipment to raise the truck high enough to get the right equipment up under there. And also when it comes to inspections as well, at TAT, we have lifts, so we can lift the whole truck up above head when it comes to checking torque on U-bolts if that's needed. If it's suspected of those to be loose, anything like that, those are items that are really accessible, and you can get a torque wrench under there. So it's very important. Most of the other tools are going to be minor. If you're a driver and you want to start inspecting your own suspension, you want to get some tools, inspection tools, you can start off with a flashlight, a pry bar, and maybe a mirror for close inspection. So that way you can kind of use that mirror to look on the inside of the bushings, on the outside of the bushings, and you're going to be looking for the indication of dry rotted bushings, as we mentioned before. Let me see if I can share some more images of some bushings, some bad bushings. So I mentioned, why would you need a mirror and flashlight for inspection? Here's an example. The flashlight being used, possible mirror if you don't have the access to get up under the truck. But you can see this bushing being pushed out here. You see that? Those are going to be indicators of suspension wear. That's the bushings being pushed out. This is going to be a high mileage truck. You can see, you can tell by just how much buildup is on the truck. This buildup actually causes, this type of buildup doesn't cause too much damage, but if it's during the winter time and they put a lot of treatment on the road and then the treatment is not washed off, the salt is not washed off, it's definitely going to end up causing this type of corrosion. But that's what you're going to be looking for. This is the type of stuff you're going to be looking for. I hope you guys are able to extract something from this information with my my babbling that I got going on here, but I'm just trying to cover this information and get it out there for you. We're still going to be doing some long form video. Let me know what you guys are looking out for. I'm going to be doing some videos on describing what the dual camshafts do on a DD15 and stuff like that, so you kind of better familiarize yourself on how these trucks are operating internally. But today we're talking about suspension, so we're going to stay on suspension. So when you want to diagnose equipment, we're staying on tools and equipment for troubleshooting. If you're diagnosing the air system, say if you got, example, you got issues with air, you got air pressure gauges we use to kind of isolate to ensure if a dryer is sending enough air supply to the suspension. If a valve might be clogged, we will test to see if we're getting enough air supply to where things need to be. And if you're not putting, if you don't have a gauge to read and you just kind of unplug it and yeah, there's air coming out of there, then you're fine. But if you put a gauge on there and you're not reading 100 psi's and it say this valve is calling for 100 psi before it releases air and brings suspension up, then, and you're not receiving that 100 psi and you don't have an air gauge to isolate it, that's just another example of the troubleshooting equipment you might need. Torque wrenches and other tools are essential for checking U-bolt tightness and bushing conditions. So even with not just U-bolts, not just the U-bolts, but all the components that whenever you go and service these systems, you have to retighten everything to spec. And you can also over tighten as well. So the bolts that bolt this torque arm to the frame, that needs to be torqued. The U-bolts down here at the bottom need to be torqued. One thing, and if you guys are just joining the industry, don't use an impact to take these top nuts off or the bottom nuts off. I'll take that back. You may be able to go ahead and use PB Blaster or some WD-40, but go ahead and you can use a gun to take them off, but don't put a gun to put them on, because these bolts are going to be hollow and there will be what's supplying air to these bags. So if you're going to go ahead and replace a bag and the bag's no good no more, then it's okay to use the impact to get the bolts off. But this top nut here, don't use an impact. Because what's going to happen, since this bolt is hollow, it's hollow so that air can go through it and air this bag up. And if you use an impact to tighten that, they're hollow, so they're not really strong. They'll just snap. And it just, of course, just destroy this bag. So make sure you don't do that. Make sure you just tighten it down with the hand tighten. And the bottom one, too, it's not hollow, but they don't seem that strong. What I'm going to pull up next is some images of some worn airbags, so you can kind of get an idea of what worn airbags look like. And if you're familiar, here's an image of what that one connection here, like for this, let me pull this over here. Like here, this one's a hollow bolt, but it also could have a different kind of, this one here is just a different connection. This is what's going to supply air to the bag. And this is a top view of the airbag. Now, if you're familiar, just like how rubber conditions look, they're going to look dry. They're going to look like, here's an example of some good bags. Those are some good bags there. This is on a trailer. I don't have images of a truck for right now, but these bags just been replaced, so you can see how fresh this rubber looks. Even that one over there, maybe a little bit discolored, but that's how they come. It's not dried out. These may not be new, but they still look in good condition. Now you can see the markings on the bags from where they rise and they lower and rise. Most of the time what happens is the bags start to wear in this area here whenever the suspension goes up and down. This area here just goes through, when it goes up and down, it just experiences a lot of wear. So most of the time you're going to see that cracking in this area, and then sometimes with the air, when the airbag starts to leak, it may not be noticeable in some conditions. You may have a airbag leaking in a loaded situation. So what I would suggest, if you are a driver and you want to try to check this on your own, just getting some soap and water, spray your bags down. When you're parking at night and you have your brakes and you still got trailer air to your suspension, spray it. Or if you see your suspension drop overnight and you're not the one that released the air from the suspension, then that's definitely going to cause some issues. Some of the suspension on, like for trailers, will have a control arm that comes out and supports the rear of the suspension so that the bags don't go and do that. But I do see that the arm kind of gets stuck and it doesn't work as smooth as it's supposed to. So definitely keep an eye on that. Hope this information is useful to you guys. Thank you everyone that's been joining us this evening. So that's what you're going to be looking for when you're dealing with airbags. When you want to troubleshoot this, mostly you're going to be looking for the bushings that I outlined to you. It's going to be visual inspection is the first thing you're going to be looking for. So obvious wear. That's the first thing you're going to be looking for. Damage, leaks, those are the easy things to find. Testing air, when you test the air suspension for leaks, that's when you can use the water solutions. That's when you can leave it for a while to see if it's going to drop. Shock absorbers, for visual inspections, you're really just going to look for signs of oil. These shock absorbers really don't last a really long time. Even more, they advertise that they last for a really long time, but they actually don't. They don't really last that long. DB, I did cover some worn leaf springs. We see a couple of times that they did lose their arch and they lose so it's very, very important to, if you see a truck leaning or if you have a truck leaning, leaf springs do wear out. Not all of them are reusable. If you have high mileage truck and you're looking to get that replaced, we did cover a little bit of the worn leaf springs. Thank you for that comment. The next we're going to be talking about preventive maintenance, but I still wanted to talk about what we're looking for when we inspect. So with shock absorbers, most of the time shock absorbers are going to need to be replaced yearly if you're using the most common shocks, that not the like high performance shocks, because don't spend too much money on high performance shocks, because I've noticed that they don't even last longer. As I mentioned, these roads are really tough out here, so more than likely you're going to replace these shock absorbers pretty often. So I wouldn't go with the higher end ones. I would go with the medium or whatever is the same as what it came off as stock. Don't spend too much extra trying to go upgrade the suspension, because you won't get that longer life out of them, is what I've seen. They still bust seals. They still go through a lot of they go through a beating, and it's very important to have a good shock in place, because what happens is, we mentioned these suspensions have leaf springs, bushings, shock absorbers. Now, if you don't, we'll go back to the suspension here. This truck here this image here doesn't display the shock absorbers, but a shock absorber would just bolt here to the truck and then to the axle housing. Now they experience a beating because you got to think about it. You got a aired up tire at 100 psi. You got another bag here at 100 psi. You got a spring the only thing that's absorbing all this shock all day over the road are those small shock absorbers. Are these small shock absorbers? And these are supposed to last how long? You know, if you look into it, some of them can say they last 2 years. Honestly, I see these shock absorbers going bad in a year, and it sucks. But they go through some hardship. They go through a beating. So when these shock absorbers do wear, what happens is you got an aired up airbag at 100 psi. You got a tire at 100 psi. It's just a very hard, tight basketball that's just bouncing up and down, and nothing's absorbing the shock. So what happens over time is the tire starts to wear. You start losing, and you start getting more vibrations on the road. You start losing stability. You're not able to drive it control it as well. So shock absorbers is another maintenance item that needs to be kept up with. So making sure that you keep up there. You can't really test them. You're just gonna visually look at them. And you do want to replace suspension parts all in one. So if you're doing an airbag, go ahead and try to replace all the airbags, because they are gonna wear. Also with these shock absorber, it's the same thing. If you have a set of shock absorbers that are going out, you're gonna have to replace them. We see shock absorbers go bad on the cab. You got cab shock absorbers. You got those are sometimes can be really tough to get to, because the whole cab is just dropped onto the truck and then just bolted down. The shock absorber, the cab's not installed and in shock absorbers. So sometimes those can be very, very tough to get to as well. Suspension on the cab is very important as well. You got cab bushings, the same style bushings that you have here, the same style bushings you'll have is on the cabs as well, that secure the cab, the whole cab to the chassis. So those will wear. Shock absorbers will wear too. As I mentioned, if you are replacing shock absorbers, be sure to replace them all at once. Don't replace just one shock or one shock at a time. You want to replace them all. And if you can do the cab bushings as well, or the cab shocks, do those as well. Do not skip out on these items. I hope everyone's doing well this evening. This morning we went live and I covered air dryer filters, so be sure to watch that, because you can save yourself a lot of headache by keeping up with maintenance. And these smaller items can end up costing you more down the road if you don't get them done. So we're going to be talking more about preventive maintenance. We talked about visually inspection of shock absorbers. Now, if you go in for a saddle, there's a saddle where this U-boat sits on here. This saddle is not made onto the spring. It sits onto the spring. So if you see rust bleeding around those areas here, here in this area, I'm sorry, I thought I had my mouse over there, but right here, rust bleeding around there, you want to go ahead and ask them, hey, when you're going in for preventive maintenance, ask them to check the torquing on the bolts. And if anything looks loose, at any point where the fastener is connected onto the back, up here, up top, definitely going to be making sure you want to get that tightened. So the next topic we're going to be talking about is preventive maintenance. So what can we do? What can I do to keep my truck up and I don't want to run into suspension problems, get my tires wore out? So what we're going to be doing is performing checks and lubricating your suspension, getting your PMs done. Do not skip out on your PMs. If you can't do the suspension inspections yourself, wherever you go in and do your PM, make sure that they have some experience. And this is kind of why we always push for you guys to come see us, because when we have someone do a preventive maintenance at our shop, when you have a PM done at our shop, you're going to have a technician that has a lot of experience in recognizing these different wears. So If you cannot get these inspections done yourself, if you don't feel too comfortable to make the call on that, then bring it into a shop. And if you want to do it together with your PMs, do it with a shop that has experience. And the reason why I bring this up is because some of just the PMs, some of just the locations that kind of focus just on oil changes, they're not going to have technicians in there that's ever done any kind of suspension work. So they're not going to be able to recognize this rust bleeding or these bushings being pushed out. And this is something that we train our guys at our location. Is anything that we do, whether it's going to be internal work, major work, light work, we do an inspection, a visual inspection, and we'll send it to you guys, which includes suspension inspection as well. So give us a shout, 972-225-3017. If you're a manager of a fleet or a fleet owner and you can't keep up with this maintenance and it seems a lot, give us a shout. We'll work with you. We'll figure out a plan to keep things going. We'll try to stack all your maintenance when you come in with PMs. That's really kind of how you're going to be able to get all this under control. If you're back on all the PMs, just don't feel overwhelmed and not be proactive and procrastinate about it, because it's just going to make things worse. The procrastination of not wanting to do these things is just going to keep building. The only way to kind of start working through this is just little by little. Okay, how about if I do a PM next month, I'm going to check the shock. I'm going to change my shocks. Okay, my next PM in the next month, I'm going to do this, do my coolant flush or the filter change. And if you can do some of this yourself, try it. But suspension work, I do not recommend doing yourself. Even the shock absorbers, it might look easy. It might look like some Lego play task that you can do yourself with just a wrench. Trust me, it is not easy. It is not easy. There's been some shock absorbers that would kick your ass just to take it off. You'd have to get the torch on it. Not a lot of times these trucks have never been touched since assembly, so there's paint over. They paint over everything, road grime, and then you try to get it off. You know, it's supposed to come off really easy, but that most of the time doesn't happen. So don't be surprised if you got a shock and you're trying to do it yourself in the parking lot, and you can't get it off. I had some comments on one of our videos from one of the channels, or from our channel, and it was really interesting because he talked about, he commented that he tried to do, or he doesn't want to do an oil change on his own, and this is going to be the same as well. You can get a no-start situation, or if you try to do suspension or use a mechanic that's not familiar with doing suspension, you can have some problems pop up. So keep all this in mind. Give us a shout if you need somebody to help you along with these different maintenance. So another item with preventive maintenance, we talked about this yesterday, is the air dryer filter. This is a big item. The air dryer filter is, if it's not replaced at least once a year, and you start building up all this condensation in the air system and start building it all up into the different air valves that are running through it, your leveling valve, there's brake valves, you end up start causing all types of problems with your braking system and suspension. So air dryer is going to be your number one thing. One thing that I didn't mention on the broadcast about the air dryer filter is the air dryer filter assembly is designed to not require you to drain the tanks, but if you're not even replacing the filter, that not draining the tanks daily shouldn't even be mentioned. So I would definitely drain the tanks often, at least once a week, to try to get that moisture out of there. Be sure to replace the air dryer filter, as I mentioned before. Do not skip that. That's very important. Tire alignment and balances. This is something as well. Whenever you have an alignment done, your whoever's going to be doing the service on that is going to recognize those suspension wear as well. They're not going to be able to do an alignment. They're going to see, hey, you know what? Your tie rods are bad. Your front bushings are really worn. Your bushings are showing a lot of wear. So definitely going to be needing to get that alignment done. I would get an alignment done once a year. Alignments can be knocked out of alignment with, especially with these road conditions that are out there. They can knock yourself out of alignment. So definitely get an alignment done. So two things are going to be good with alignment is you're going to make sure that it's properly aligned, and then you're going to be able to see if you got some components that are worn, because the alignment shop's going to be able to see that. Not all alignment shops are going to be able to do suspension work because they understand how heavy it is. Some shops are just dedicated to suspension work. So you got to ensure that they're set up for that type of work. It's not as easy as it looks. Shock absorbers are not as bad. That's another preventive maintenance. You don't need a major shop to do shock absorbers, but like I said, I've seen some shock absorbers kick some technicians' ass. I've had a shock absorber kick my ass before as well. If you get to a point where you can't figure this out, talk to a professional. Talk to somebody that works on these trucks. Talk to somebody that has experience. As I mentioned, if you're in the DFW area and you're looking for a local shop, TAT Express, give us a shout, 972-225-3017. Or if you want to get some questions and you got some questions in a chat, hit us up in a chat. Or if you're catching this broadcast later, hit us up some comments down below. I even we answer some questions that get emailed to us as well. info@tatexpressinc.com. If we can't get to all the questions, we do our best, but let me know what we can help you out with. TAT Express, 972-225-3017. Okay, so if you ignore these things, you're gonna come. Safety does matter. Drivers will follow safety measures and make sure that they do. But a lot of times, what I notice is they won't follow safety measures until something happens, and then they claim that I always follow safety matters. I don't know how this happened, but if you look back into it, they really weren't following safety matters. But it's in their best interest to say, hey, I was, because sometimes they won't take accountability. And I'm not trying to attack drivers, but I just see it often. The drivers don't take accountability for how they handle the equipment, and they want to blame it on different people, and they don't want to take accountability for it. So if you got any questions or concerns, hit us up before we wrap this broadcast up. We talked about key points here. I really encourage maintenance. Preventive maintenance is really going to be your best bet. Getting your alignments done, getting the shock absorbers placed, getting your PMs done, and having people check your bushings if you're not able to see those bushings. And if you're noticing these different things, if you're noticing drivability concerns, be sure to get this checked out and do not ignore it. A few questions that came into the channel that I wanted to discuss real quick before we wrap it up. If you guys got any questions that you want to send us, let me know. Hit me up in the chat. But I want to get to a couple of these questions here, or comments. One of the comments here, it says it was off an oil change video. It was off of how to change oil on the DD15. The comment was, I was going to try to do this. As I mentioned, how to change oil on a DD15. He commented, I was going to try to do this as a driver of my own, so I didn't have to go and pay a shop. But it's a lot more complicated than I think. Lots of little details that can be overlooked. Best to leave it to a shop. People who do this on their time, all the time, they know what they're doing. A driver to do this yourself in a parking lot is almost certain to have a no-start condition and have to call road service anyway. For more than what you were about to avoid trying to pay a shop, you're not really saving any money. So that's a good comment. It seems very easy. Some of this stuff seems very easy, and it's like a technician saying, "Oh, I could drive. I could do that amount of driving as well." No, you can't. I mentioned this in my last broadcast when we were letting you guys know that we have a really solid shop. Everything's set up we try to set everything up really well and comfortable for the technicians so that we won't overlook things, because we do have a lot of processes in place that they have to follow whenever they check in each truck that comes in. And since we ask so much out of them, we try to make comfort one of the most things and have everything available so that they can go through the flow of getting these items done, like oil changes, where we have the priming system in place. We have everything where you're catching the fuel, the waste, being able to dispose of it really easily, getting it out of your way, everything staying clean, not contaminating anything, and being able to do a good workflow. So yes, definitely a good question and good feedback on a good comment on that. Air dryer, on the air dryer video that we did just earlier today, I did a broadcast about air dryer. I had a comment on that one. He says he got a D13, and on that air dryer filter, he asked if he can do it on his own. Yes, you can do it on your own, but let me tell you this: when we mentioned the ones in that video yesterday, if you didn't join our broadcast, be sure to check that out. I was talking about air dryer filters and how how important it is to replace those air dryer filters because they get seized to the housing. Now, if you have not replaced your air dryer filter in a really long time and you want to do it yourself, it may be tough to get it removed. This is kind of why I'm mentioning that they get seized. So you might not be able to do this. If it looks like it doesn't want to come off, don't fight it off and force it off, and because you could strip it and have some issues, and then you're going to be really stuck because you won't be able to get a filter back on it, or you have to replace the whole dryer assembly, which you might not be equipped to do. So take a look at it. If you know, go ahead and try to replace it on your own. You know, if you can get it knocked loose, go ahead and do it on your own. But if it seems like it's really seized on there, be careful. I don't want you to damage the actual dryer assembly. See what else we got going. Thanks everybody that's joined us this evening. Be sure to hit that like and make sure to subscribe to our channel if you're not subscribed to our channel. So I appreciate everyone that's joined us this evening. I think we're going to wrap this broadcast up. If you're looking for service, be sure to hit us up, 972-225-3017. Thanks again for everyone that's joined us this evening. I hope you were able to get some information from this video. We try to cover as much as possible. I try to give you some, some real visual looks on what bushings look like, what to look for on your suspension, what to look for on your shocks, anything like that. If you can't handle it on your own, give us a shout, 972-225-3017. If you're catching this broadcast later, let me know if you got any questions or concerns in the comments, or if you want to add anything to our suspension video today. Thanks again, everybody that's joined us again. We'll catch you next time. Be safe out there.